Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, Michael people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. The final day of June has a pretty packed podcast, serving up a little bit of this and a little bit of that to get you ready for the second half, or at least the start of the third quarter of 2025, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And now that we're on the eve of July, the second half of the year, as I just mentioned, it's just flying by. And the 4th of July is this Friday, as we know. Before you know it, it'll be the All-Star break, it'll be the trade deadline, it'll be training camp in the NFL, and then it's just going to zoom from then on out to the point where we'll be looking at Labor Day. But let's not get crazy, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Unfortunately, we can't pause the hands of time, but we could certainly be in the moment, and that moment right now is this podcast, and also, is this the beginning of the Sports Dead Zone 2.0? Now, we got some things cooking here on the podcast, and you know, even in its slowest day, there's always something to talk about. But you have to think, with baseball being the only sport going, and on top of the NBA and NHL free agency, which, yes, that will percolate a little bit over the next few days, but it's probably not going to last until past the 4th of July, so whatever fireworks are going to set off prior to that, it'll certainly be quiet, I would think, by the time we get to the end of the week, and certainly a week from today, there may not be anything to discuss. So with that, we do have some Wimbledon to get into, which is later on, as they commence at the All England Club today. We do have the final golf major in the middle of the month. We do have all the aforementioned baseball activities that will take place throughout the month of July. And yes, I may be grasping for straws, but there is a possibility that a week from today, there may not be much to roll my sleeves up and get into. But you know I'm going to deliver whatever the sports world has to offer, whatever opinions, analysis, etc. So please, whatever it is that you do, make sure you stay locked in, tapped in, subscribe, do all the things that I hopefully, that with my assessment on anything and everything that happens in sports, that you just stay with me, not only throughout the course of the summer, but obviously into the fall, deep into the winter and beyond. So again, subscribe, rate, review, all those good things that I usually say at the end of the podcast, Apple, Spotify, JAYREELZ.com, of course, on YouTube at JAYREELZ. So with that pushed aside, I'm not going to say it is a Sports Dead Zone 2.0 just yet, but I would think a week from today, it probably will certainly look that way. But now that I got that out the way, I wanted to start off with a little bit, and I get it, that may not be the most positive news, because when we think about a lull in the sports calendar, where we had that from February to right about March Madness, and I would think at the start of the baseball season. So if you're wondering, wait a minute, if this is 2.0, what was the first one? Well, that goes from the minute the Eagles won the Super Bowl up until, we'll say, the baseball season, and then it really went into hyperspace after that, and then now it is starting to come down, as you know. But I had to start off with that just to kind of set the stage for what's going to happen next. And I'm going to start off with the baseball, because over the last 2.5 weeks since, let me think of the date off the top of my head, I believe it was June 12th, when the Mets swept the Washington Nationals at home. And at the time, they had come off of back-to-back sweeps, sweeping in Colorado and then against the Nationals to the tune of 45-24. And you can check all my social media. I never once, as a diehard Met fan, puffed my chest out to think that 45-24, best record in the sport. Look at this Met team. I can't believe the way they performed, so on and so forth, etc. As we all know, baseball is a marathon. And granted what they're going through right now, which I will expound upon in a matter of moments, but there will be a time, or at least so we hope, that come in July, hopefully sooner than later, but there'll be a stretch to where the Mets get back on track. They'll start winning series, they'll start winning games, and hopefully get themselves in a winning streak to where they could put themselves in a position to maybe win a division when it's all said and done, and maybe even have a first-round bye. But that is a far cry from what we've seen here since June 12th, because ever since they dusted off the Nationals, they have lost 13 of 16. And actually, when we were on the podcast Thursday, they finally snapped the season-long drought against the Braves. Well, really, it was a couple of weeks. But they were 0-5 against the Braves. They won on Wednesday night, and then they followed that up with a 4-0 win on Thursday to where Griffin Canning goes down, a la Tyrese Halliburton, a la Jason Tatum, a la Damian Lillard, with a ruptured Achilles, so he's toast for 2025. And you thought, all right, back-to-back wins. They got themselves in a little bit of a groove. Now they're going to go to Pittsburgh, as we all know, one of the dregs of the National League. And what happens? Not only do they get swept, not only do they get scored, or outscored, I should say, 30-4 in the 3 games, but they also had a players-only meeting after the game on Saturday, which they lost 9-2. And mind you, they gave up 6 runs in the 8th inning. All right, fine, so it was a close game. Maybe not as the way the score indicated at the end when it was 9-2. It wasn't a thing where the Mets were down 6-0 after the 3rd inning and away they went. So for them to have this players-only meeting Saturday after another loss, and what was said in that meeting, we'll probably never know. But I think if I could get maybe just a bit of a clue, or if from somebody who's way on the outside looking in, I'm sure part of that discussion was we have one more game tomorrow afternoon, meaning yesterday, in Pittsburgh. Let's just take that day off. Then we have our actual day off today before we have a big homestand to where we play the Milwaukee Brewers, who are fighting as I speak for the NL Central there with the Cubs as well as the Cardinals in the mix. And then, oh, by the way, over the weekend, starting on Friday in a 3:10 afternoon start on the 4th of July, they have the Yankees coming in for 3. So let's just say goodbye, Pittsburgh. Let's put our feet up, not even scratch, claw, fight, etc. And then have 2 back-to-back days off so we can regroup and then come back to Citi Field on Tuesday, which will be tomorrow night, depending on when you're listening to this, to start off a homestand to where maybe, just maybe, they could win a game, win a series, or maybe even go on a winning streak. I mean, this is just an embarrassment. And I understand that the Pirates are a Major League Baseball team, despite the fact that they are poor when it comes to their record. And I'm going to pull up the standings now just to see where they're at, as they are currently in last place. Coming into this series, they were 32-50. And now they leave with a robust 35-50. And it's just mind-boggling to think that a baseball team as good as they've been, and I understand we can look at the record, it's 48-37. And if somebody would have asked me at the start of the year, going into July, that your Met team would be 48-37, I'd sign for it. But now in 2.5 weeks ago, when you were 21 games over 500, and now you've shaved that in half, pretty much, because 10 games right off the docket. Thankfully, the Phillies can't get out of their own way, although they have a 1.5 game lead in the division and 2 in the loss. But it's a situation where this team, despite the injuries, but everybody has injuries, and despite the fact that this pitching staff is now being put together with scotch tape, bubble gum, and probably spit at this point. And I know that the deadline is at the end of next month, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of reinforcements coming along the way, I would think. But this is just, I mean, you can't even avert your eyes, because this is a dumpster fire that no Met fan has ever expected. Between the pitching staff, I talked about Griffin Canning, who's had his moments. I give it up. And that signing actually has been a lot more surprising, although he has had some bad starts along the way. But between Canning going down, between Tyler McGill going down, between Kodai Senga going down, who knows when Senga's coming back, because sadly he's made out of glass. And for the bullpen, which they had to bring back the porno star name of Dickie Lovelady yesterday, and they even brought in another former Met from a few years back with the long blonde hair, Travis Jankowski, who had to go in, mop up yesterday, and gave up 2 runs in the 8th inning. I mean, what is happening here? And I understand, they got to fill out a roster. They got to bring in bodies. They got to do whatever it takes. So I can't fault David Stearns and company that whatever it is they're trying to do, the piecemeal this, they're going to have to, like I said, it's literally throw it in the wall, let's see if it sticks. But nothing is sticking. It's sliding down the wall. It's actually bouncing off the wall at this point. because no matter who you put in there, it has just been just a wreck. And we could talk about the lineup. We could get into that. Listen, Soto's been the only guy that's been hitting. And he's certainly been awakened, and hopefully he's probably thinking that tomorrow is June 31st and not July 1st because he's had a torrid month. But this team needs to get their act together. And with this rotation, even Dave Peterson gets shelled the other day. I mean, I don't know what else to say about this team at this point. The bullpen, as we all know, is up in flames. Huascar Brazoban has certainly come back down to earth after the first 2 months, and he actually pitched very well. But now, forget about it. He's been lit up like a Christmas tree. The bullpen, they're just shuffling in guys left and right. Might as well have me at least coming out in the 8th inning and throw a couple of innings. Yeah, I may get lit up, but at this point, they're pretty much bringing anybody and everybody off the street. So who knows what is going to happen here or what's been happening behind the scenes at Citi Field, because this plan that certainly has gone well for the most part up until these last 2.5 weeks, it has to change. And I get it. It's not as if they're going to bring in a number one ace from somebody else's team that's right now waffling somewhere in either the American League or National League, or a scenario where a good 8th inning reliever or even just another decent reliever on another team. It's not as if they're going to come walking through that door anytime soon. Yeah, it's probably going to be a few weeks, but guess what? In a few weeks, this Met team could be 5 games out of first. It could be 10 games out of first the way they're playing. So what's going to happen here? I hope Carlos Mendoza has sent the message. He also got ejected the other day, balls and strikes. So the team is just frustrated and at wit's end. And I get it. But also the fans are, including yours truly. Because, yes, we know the ebbs and flows, the highs and lows, the lulls of a Major League Baseball season. It's not going to go swimmingly. It's not going to be the 86 Mets when they get off to a 20-4 start and they're going to cruise to a division title. I get it. But this play that we've seen here has just been abominable. And they've lost to bad teams, they've lost to good teams, they've lost in every way, shape, or form, and it was punctuated by what we saw here over the weekend. So you would think that this team right now is at rock bottom. It has to be. Because of how the personnel's been dealt with, how, one more time, the Pirates outscored the Mets 30-4. This isn't the Pirate team, the We Are Family team back in the 70s. And we'll talk about Dave Park in a minute. This isn't even the 2013-15 teams that made it to the postseason 3 straight years, with Andrew McCutchen in his MVP form and prime. Far from that, and Garrett Cole was their ace. So, what gives? I would only hope, and I was going to go to Carlos Mendoza, when they left the locker room in Pittsburgh, and before they boarded on the plane, and maybe even when they got on the plane, I hope he told the guys that, hey, no baseball. Go home, enjoy your families, relax, take a big, giant breath, because these next 2 weeks leading into the All-Star break, it's got to go at a breakneck pace. Because, again, Brewers and Yankees coming into town, and this is a scenario where this losing stretch could actually get worse. And I'm not trying to say they got to go 4-2 over these next 6, which would be great. So keep in mind, Met fans, that the sky may be falling, but thankfully Philly is just hanging around. It's almost as if the NL East is hot potato. Mets had that nice 4.5 game lead. They said, no, we don't want it. We give it back. Then the Phillies got themselves 4 games up. They said, no, we don't want it. We give it back. And now it's a scenario where the Phillies, they're not even thinking about running and hiding. They're looking to go neck and neck with the Mets throughout the summer to see who wins the division once we get to the end of September. So all I got to say is I hope it turns around tomorrow, and I hope they've stayed away from any type of baseball, that they're not even getting wrapped up in going to the batting cages or getting extra work in or coming to the stadium. No. Stay away, just decompress, and come back fresh and renewed and get ready for this 2-week stretch here, this sprint to the All-Star break, and hopefully they come out smelling like roses and maybe turn their fortunes around. So that's number 1. Number 2 with the baseball, I have to get to this because I was 10 years old when that We Are Family team, the 79 Pirates, and I remember watching that series closely. They were down 3-1 in that series, and they came back and won, and thanks to Pops, Willie Stargell, was the key contributor to that team. But another big guy on that squad was Dave Parker, otherwise known as the Cobra, one of the great nicknames in baseball. And for him, as I'm sure you heard by now, Saturday afternoon, passed away at the age of 74. And I know he wasn't doing too well. I had seen him on some videos where they've commemorated the teams over the years. And I guess they had a bit of an old-timers day last year. And I remember just the video of him being in a wheelchair. And I don't know what was going on with his health, but he certainly didn't look good. And it was unfortunate that yesterday, and less than a month away from him being enshrined in Cooperstown, where he did get the Veterans Committee vote to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, where he won't have his day. And I don't know how his health, if he was going to be even able to speak. I don't know along the lines of if it was a situation where, yes, if he would have showed up, would he have been able to get on the podium? Would he have had enough strength to just have a few sentences or put out a few words or even a statement to just be how grateful he was to have the opportunity just to be on that stage, etc. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see that. But this guy was a beast. Had one of the great arms of his generation, one of the great right fielders of his time, a guy who was the MVP in 1978, a two-time batting champ, two times World Series champ, not only with the 79 Pirates, but with the 89 Oakland A's, also played with the Reds in between. And for him to make his mark, and I get it, when you look at his stats overall, he doesn't have the 500 home runs, he doesn't have the 3,000 hits, he doesn't have those sexy numbers which would automatically make him a lock Hall of Famer. Obviously, it took many years to get to this point to where the Veterans Committee elected him in, but he was a clutch player, he was a big-time player, as evidenced by the 79 All-Star game, throwing out the two runners, including Brian Downing at home plate. Although me, as a Met fan, Lee Mazzilli should have been the MVP of that game, considering he hit the game-tying home run and also had the walk-off. It wasn't a walk-off because the National League was the road team, but also walked in the winning run. But I get it. They weren't going to give it to a Met, a team that was literally floundering and drew 2,000 people at the ballpark at Shea back in the day. But I digress. But for Dave Parker, just sad at the age of 74, passing away. Thoughts, prayers, and condolences go out to the Parker family, the Pirates, Major League Baseball, Reds, Athletics, the teams he's played for. Just very sad. And again, just shy of a month from him being inducted into the Hall of Fame that he's unable to be there on his day. I mean, it doesn't get any sadder than that. So we wish his family, and of course all the condolences, prayers, etc., to he and his family. Now, as far as anything else that's happening in baseball, the Tigers, right now with Tarek Skubal, he's looked like he's going to be a back-to-back Cy Young Award winner. Last night, if you saw there on Sunday Night Baseball, 7 innings, 1 hit, 1 walk, 13 strikeouts, 10-2. ERA is minuscule as the Tigers roll on and have an 11.5 game lead in the AL Central. So they could pretty much put their feet up because that is a wrap. And makes you even wonder. They're tied with the Dodgers for the best record in the sport. And we know the Dodgers, with their rotation in shambles, but they seem to put it together and are in good stead in their division as well. But who knows? Will it be Tigers and Dodgers when it's all said and done? Now, obviously, we still have a long way to go as we're past the halfway point of the baseball season because a lot of the teams have played more than 81 games. I know the All-Star break is in a couple of weeks, and people will look at that as the halfway point, but as we all know, a lot of teams would have played in upwards of 94, 95 games at that time. But the Tigers looking very stout, looking very formidable, looking very good, obviously anchored by Skubal. And they also have a very good and underrated offense. And we could talk about the Dodgers. Obviously, we've talked about them aplenty here. And with Shohei Ohtani getting a start in Kansas City a couple days ago where he touched 101 on the gun, the fastest pitch he's thrown as a major leaguer, as he's been stretched now to throw a couple of innings, as he did so against the Royals. And in the 2 innings, he gave up a hit and a walk, I believe. So he is working his way back to being that full-time starter. You would think as you get to the end of July and certainly by August, I think it'd be raring to go to throw at least however many pitches, maybe 5, 6 innings and go deeper as the season progresses. So for Ohtani, and I believe he hit his 30th home run or his 29th the other day. I don't think he's hit 30 just yet. I'll double check that. But for Ohtani, everything's looking A-okay for him on the mound. So that's one to really keep an eye on, especially with a Dodger team, as I mentioned, with Tyler Glasnow and Blake Snell and Roki Sasaki. certainly navigating their way in and out of the IL and not pitching as much as I'm sure the Dodger fan would like to see, but with all their resources and all their farm system, etc., they're in good shape no matter what. So you got to give it up to them. But as far as, let me see, I'm looking for the home run leaders. Shohei is at 29, just to confirm. So yes, I thought he didn't hit 30. I know Aaron Judge got his 30th, and Cal Raleigh, as we all know, 32. Has not hit a home run since we last spoke. So Raleigh right there at 32, on pace to actually break Aaron Judge's record of 62 for the American League. So just keep that in mind as we move it along. But with baseball overall, you don't really have a lot of juicy storylines. Are we going to talk about the benches clearing in Arizona with Jesus Sanchez and the catcher? No, I'm not. Although the Marlins have won 7 in a row. I mean, give it up for them. And now, is that going to last? We know that's not going to be the case as they come home this week. But like I said, ebbs and flows, highs and lows, peaks and valleys. Right now, the Marlins are looking like world beaters. Who would have ever thought that they would have won 7 in a row and the Mets would have had this stretch where they've lost 13 to 16? That's just how the baseball season is, as we've seen. But you have some interesting matchups here in the early part of this week heading into the 4th of July. And the first one is up in Toronto, where the Yankees go north of the border to play the Blue Jays. Now, the Jays are 3 behind, and it's a 4-game series. So if they sweep, they'll be in first place. Now, that may be a tall order and may be a lot to ask, but even if they win 3 out of 4, they'll get 2 games in the standings, so there'll be 1 back. And with the Rays sandwiched in between, 2 in the loss and 1.5 back, that looks like it could be very interesting to see how that's going to develop here over the early part of the week, where Tampa, they will be off today, and they're probably going to be home, I would think. Tampa will be hosting the Athletics, and the Athletics were just in the Bronx over the weekend as they lost 2 out of 3. So who knows? Maybe the Rays will get back on the beam and see if they could push the Yankees there. Same for the Blue Jays with the AL East and how that's going to unfold. So we'll keep in mind of that in the early part of this week. You have the Padres going to Philadelphia. That's an interesting series there, and that starts tomorrow, I believe, in Philadelphia. No, it actually starts today, and that should be a 3-gamer. Here in the early part of the week, St. Louis at Pittsburgh, only because St. Louis obviously in the mix there in the Central. You have the Brewers at the Mets, as you know, Angels in Atlanta, Baltimore at Texas, Cleveland at Chicago to play the Cubs. And other series, Kansas City at Seattle, White Sox at LA, Dodgers, San Francisco, Arizona. So you have a couple of good series there, Detroit at Washington, Minnesota, Miami. So really the only series of note would be New York, Toronto, San Diego, Philly as far as matchups go, but the other series that I mentioned, because those teams in the mix when it comes to the division races, whether it be Athletics, Tampa, of course, with the 2 games behind the Yankees in the division, and some of the other teams that are behind, because the standings right now, other than forget about the AL Central and the NL West right now, because the Dodgers, I believe, have a 7.5 game lead over, actually 6 in a loss, 7 over the Padres, 7.5 over the Giants. And then you have a scenario with starting with the AL, the West. Astros right now have a sizable lead, 6 in a loss, 6.5 over the Mariners. And I've been surprised by the Astros, but as crazy as this may sound, the Astros look like they're going to win another division title, that they're going to have home field, whether it be a bye or hosting a wild card. But they've been awful at home here the last 2 years in the postseason. So just keep that in mind as you move it along. And their home record is actually good. They're 32-14. But in the postseason, they've been awful. Remember, 2 years ago, they got swept all 4 games by the Rangers in the ALCS, where they had the home field. Remember, they were 2-0. They lost the first 2 games at home, then won the 3 in Texas, including that dramatic game where Altuve had the 3-run homer when they were down 4-2 in the 9th inning. And then they come home and they lose the next 2. And then last year against the Tigers in the wild card round to open up the playoffs, they got swept in the first 2 games against them. And mind you, they had a 3-game series. As we all know, the home field in the wild card round, it's not a situation where they're going to go back to Detroit. No, they had the home field. So even if they would have lost the first game, they could have won the second game and then still win the series. No, they lost both of those games. So they are on a losing streak at home. So again, just keep that nugget in the back of your brain as a receipt when you get to October, considering that the Astros will make it. And then the NL Central, Cubs have a 2-game lead over the Brewers, 2.5 over the Cards, 3 in a loss. And then even the Reds, who are 5 back. And that looks like that could be one of those races to the very end, especially when you have 4 teams separated by 5 games. That's one you have to keep in the back of your mind. But other than that, that's what you have with baseball as we head into the month of July. Let me see if there's anything else I need to discuss here with the sport. No, that's it. Ohtani, as we talked about the Mets being a disaster. What else is new? But that's what you have there with the baseball. Nothing else to really unpack or get into. Now as I get out of the batter's box, this is going to be maybe not a two-pronged attack. I'll start with the NBA because really the NBA is not going to be juicy. I'm not going to talk about the second round the other night or even Ace Bailey for that matter. I think that's much ado about nothing. And with everybody going gaga over Ace Bailey not showing up to any of the pre-draft workouts and the situation where teams that he was going to work out for, he passed on it, which obviously that's not a good optic. I understand that, and I totally get that. But then the whole situation where Utah drafted him and saying, yeah, I'm shocked that Utah drafted me. I didn't work out for them. Well, no duh there, Ace. But there was a lot of talk that he wasn't going to show up until today, where a lot of the rookies, they'll show up the next day or later by Saturday. And although Walter Clayton, the other first-round pick by the Jazz, he flew out there, I believe, Friday, where Ace didn't fly out with him, and a lot of people thought, oh, this is going to be bad news there for Bailey and even for, the Jazz for that matter, but he did show up on Saturday and told the press there that he was blessed and that he's going to trust his workouts and trust the process, and he knows the work that he's put in, and all right, that's great. Saying all the right things, obviously feels good to be in this position, 5th pick overall, all right, it may be Utah, it's not Washington, which I believe was a place that he wanted to go to. And for Bailey, let's see. Now he's going to have to back it up. The Summer League is on the horizon. Let's see how he performs there. I'm not a Summer League guy, but I'm sure a lot of the spotlight's going to be on him considering this controversy or whatever you want to call it with him prior to the draft, the night of the draft, and then a couple of days after the draft. But to me, I didn't really make that a big deal. I didn't talk about it on my YouTube channel or anything. I'm not going to even bring it up now, despite the fact that I'm bringing it up, and I'm not going to be one of those pounding the table, be like, who is Ace Bailey? And he is going down the wrong path, and so on and so forth. Can we relax? Can we just take it easy? We don't know that just yet. All right, so let's see what's going to happen here, starting with the Rookie League. If he shows up on time, if he's missing practices, if he's taking games off or plays off, then you can have an argument. And even then, that's a little bit of a stretch, but we'll see as we move it along. But with the NBA, you're not going to have a very sexy free agency period. And you already have players that have signed and have stayed with their teams, whether it's Naz Reid, whether it's Bobby Portis, whether it's James Harden, even Jabari Smith got a big contract. So those guys right now are staying with their respective teams in Minnesota, Milwaukee, the Clippers, and the Houston Rockets. Now, also LeBron, can't forget him. He's opting in on his $52.6 million player option, but he also wants to see whether direction of the team is going to go as far as procuring players because he wants to win a championship. He's going to be 41, in fact, exactly 6 months from today. So December 30th, he's going to be 41 years of age. And for LeBron, obviously he wants to win another title and maybe even play a couple more years, who knows. So first things first, let's see what Rob Pelinka and company are going to do. Obviously they're going to need some size to go along with Luka, as we know that they were hurting there as far as their front court goes. So we'll have to wait and see what LeBron and company are going to be thinking about when it comes to how this team's going to be put together. But obviously he's all in on this year, and I've already seen him working out and doing all these drills. And you know LeBron is from another planet, so you got that going on. The only other note as far as a player that is opting out and is now a free agent is DeAndre Ayton. Now, you're going to get crazy about the former #1 overall pick of the Phoenix Suns. Now, who knows? Maybe if he goes somewhere in a good spot, maybe the Lakers, that could be a situation, but I'm sure he's going to want big-time money, and I don't know what the Lakers, considering they're giving LeBron $52 million, and they're going to have to fork money over to Luka when the time comes, and I'm sure that's going to be not the max deal he would have gotten if he stayed in Dallas, but he's going to get a 4-year, 200 and whatever it is, 20 some odd $1 million deal. So with the second apron coming in, Ayton's not going to get anything close to what those guys are going to make. So that's going to be very tenuous territory for Rob Pelinka and company as far as the Lakers go. But Ayton is a guy that has ability and has had his moments, but certainly has not been able to put it together to be that big man. It's a guy that's going to be a force, whether it be down low, offensively or defensively. And Ayton certainly has been quiet there in Portland after he got shipped there. That was the whole Drew Holiday, that whole deal that went down at the time with Milwaukee and Phoenix, a 3-team deal. And for Ayton, let's see what he's going to do, where he resurfaces, and how he's going to rise above to be that guy that a lot of people are going to think that, not to say he's going to be a dominant big man throughout the course of his career, but a guy that's going to be more than serviceable. A guy that's going to be more than just 18-9, or maybe even less than that when it comes to his numbers. Not to say he should be 25-12, but a guy that size and with that ability, he should be averaging in the 20s and boards anywhere between 11 and 12 a game. So, again, I don't want to just pick on Ayton, but as we've seen here, certainly has not been anything close to what he should have been coming out number one there in Arizona many years ago. So with the free agency list, and as I read this off to you, it is not a pretty one. If you're thinking, all right, what can we look for? Who's going to be a juicy player that's going to come off a board? Now, you know Miles Turner. I'm sure he's probably going to look for a deal there to stay in Indiana. It's the only team he's ever played for, and I would think with everything that had transpired throughout this run, he'd want to run it back with the organization. I don't know if he's going to take a discount, but he's probably the one guy that you're going to think of, considering that they just finished their season a week ago, that for a team, I don't know, Lakers maybe, that could probably procure his services. But here are the players of note, all right? And it's not a big list. Here we go, people. Miles Turner. You like D'Angelo Russell? Duncan Robinson, a shooter. Teams need a shooter. And he's a good, third, fourth option. He's not a guy that is a rotation. He's a rotation guy. He's not a starter where he's going to light up the scoreboard or score sheet. Karis LeVert, good player, serviceable player. Dennis Schrader, Marvin Bagley III, Larry Nance Jr., then you have your veterans, you have your Chris Pauls, your Al Horfords, your Russell Westbrooks, if you want to go that route. Kevon Looney, Josh Giddey, Jonathan Kuminga. Kuminga and Giddey are restricted free agents, so there comes some draft picks in the process if you do happen to sign them. Malik Beasley, who's now part of this maybe investigation regarding gambling, so that's something just to keep in mind as a caveat there. But as I go on down the list, is this one that's jumping off the page for you? It is not. Now, there are some guys that you could say, all right, plug them in. If you're the Knicks, why not Karis LeVert? Why not Spencer Dinwiddie? Why not some of these other guys that you could plug in there? And it's not going to cost you a ton of money. I think just looking at some of these players, maybe a Clint Capella, a guy that's down low that could get you some rebounds, get you some points too. I mean, he's not a scorer big time, but there's a guy that could run up and down the floor and give you some size that they lost when they let Isaiah Hartenstein go to the defending champs, or the reigning champs right now. Not defending because the season hasn't started yet. So there are some players that you could choose at that fill out a roster. But if you're looking for a guy, or dare I say the guy, this isn't the draft class, or this isn't the free agency class. So I'm just going to leave it there, people. Other than that, you don't really have a lot to chew on. The Dorian Finney-Smiths, the Tim Hardaway Jr.'s, the Bruce Brown Jr.'s. That's a guy, won a championship. Good to plug in somewhere, coming off the bench. Knick fans, hey, who would you rather have, Bruce Brown or Campaign? And I'm not making Bruce Brown out to be Vinnie Johnson, but please look him up if you don't know who I'm talking about, to the younger sports fan. But that's what you have. NBA, we'll see how it unfolds. You know, I'll talk about it on Thursday, who signs where. Maybe have signing trades. Who knows, maybe something shocking will transpire, but you know I'll be on top of that. All right, now as I take off the high tops and let me lace up the skates to take a trip around the ice, and before I even get to the free agency stuff, I have to talk about the Islanders. Now, full disclosure, it's not as if I've been zeroed in on this draft. Now, of course, the number one pick, as we talked about on Thursday, you figured it was going to be the defenseman Matthew Schaefer. You heard about the other guys there at the top. James Hagan, another one, the local kid from Long Island. But the one surprise that came down early Friday was the trade. Matthew Darche, the GM, already wheeling and dealing, trading Noah Dobson to the Montreal Canadiens for not one, but 2 draft picks, which were 16th and 17th in the first round here this past Friday. And Dobson was a guy who had a big-time season 2 years ago, had 70 points, and looked like he was going to be the defenseman of the future as far as offensively goes, but then certainly had dialed it back big time. Last year, performed at half the production and was looking for a big payday. Well, he did get it, but now the Canadians are going to pay them 8 years, I believe, $72 million deal. He's getting $9 million a year. Thanks, but no thanks, knowing that Matthew Schaefer's coming in. But with those 2 picks that they got, they were able to get what looks like could be a top 6 forward and a one Victor Eklund, who's a winger, and maybe a guy that you could plug and play there to be a second line performer, which would be great. But then the other pick that they got at 17 was a kid Keyshawn Atchison, who is looking like, and nobody's even said this, so I'm bringing this up, a guy that is very physical, defenseman, played at Kitchener in the Ontario Hockey League, and when I hear Kitchener and I hear physical and has some offensive ability, the first person that came to mind was Scott Stevens. Now, if he comes out to be anywhere near Scott Stevens, the guy's going to Hall of Fame. So for Atchison, let's see. Because the Islanders need some ruggedness. They need some physicality. And I've never seen this guy play. This is just from what I've watched and read, etc. And I'm not going to go by highlights, people. You know me. I'm not going to be sold on a sexy highlight package to think that this guy is going to be an all-world Hall of Famer. I'm not. But from what I've seen and read, and this guy could be also a second-line defenseman. That is fantastic. And the Islanders need defensemen the worst way. I know the Adam Pellics and the Ryan Pulaks, even the Alexander Romanovs, they do the job, but they're getting a little bit long in the tooth. They've been on the team for quite some time. And the Scott Mayfields of the world, do I even need to go there? So to know that you got your possible future captain in Schaefer, and then for Atchison to come in there and maybe be the guy that's going to throw his body around, but also add some offense too. And then with Eklund also in the mix offensively, where the Islanders need just all types of goal scorers and players of that ilk, fantastic. And they also got a physical guy later on in the first round, a big winger who's 6'6", and a guy that, who knows, he may be raw as far as his ability goes, and a guy that you're going to have to wait and see when it's all said and done if he's going to be a player that is going to make his mark in the league. So let's see what's going to happen there as I'm trying to pull up the draft list here, because you would think I should know these names off the top of my head. Islanders, here we go. Now, that's not what I'm looking for, but okay. But a lot of people are looking at this draft, and you know me, I'm not in winners and losers, etc., but people are giving the Islanders not only just for what they did in the first round, but even in the later rounds, an A+, which then harkens back to the 74 draft when they had Clark Gillies 4th overall and Brian Trottier 22nd overall, and both of those guys were Hall of Famers, and Trottier is one of the best two-way players ever. And if the Islanders come close to that draft, they've hit a grand slam. Not a home run, a grand slam. So Islander fans, we got some hope. Keep your fingers crossed. And who knows, maybe with some wheeling and dealing with the free agency period, and there are a lot more better free agents in the NHL than there are in the NBA, I can tell you that. But who knows? Hopefully Matthew Darche is not done. Hopefully he brings in a guy or two that the Islanders are going to desperately need, and maybe give this organization a facelift, because granted, they had some success early on in this decade, but after Barry Trotz left and he brought in Lane Lambert to coach, and even with Patrick Waugh after that, the team has not done well. So hopefully this is a stepping stone to bigger, better, and brighter days ahead. That's all I could say when it comes to that. So let's see, Islander fans. We can only hope and pray, but that's what you have there with the Islanders, as I'm sure the Islander fans are over the moon, and I know I am, especially with those first-round picks that they got. And let's just see how that all shakes down. Now, let me see. Now, the team, hold on a second. Atchison. Yeah, Atchison, I thought he played at Kitchener. I was looking at another player, so that's my bad. But I still think of Scott Stevens, considering when you look at the little bio that they have on him, he actually played at Barrie. I thought it was Kitchener, so my apologies there. Bite my tongue. Thankfully, I caught myself here. So for those who were listening earlier and probably saying, JAYREELZ, he did not play at Kitchener. So again, mea culpa, hand raised high in the air. You know me, always staying accountable for myself. But when you think about the rest of this first round, I know we talked about the other day the Michael Misas of the world who got drafted by San Jose to go along with Macklin Celebrini. So who knows? That could be a very good 1-2 punch or a very good line for those two players as San Jose tries to get themselves back on the map. And they already had one of their players who had been around for a long time, as you know, Marc-Edouard Vlasic, who had played on the team 19 years, drafted in 2006. Was not going to be brought back, unconditional waivers, so I'm sure he's probably going to try to latch on to another team. But for a guy who's been a part of that community, a part of that franchise for 19 years, that only two other players in the history of the sport have, as a defenseman, have played longer for one team than he. That is Ray Bourque and Nicholas Lidstrom. So that's some pretty lofty company for Vlasic and no longer a San Jose Shark. But with Misa and Celebrini, certainly that's a good 1-2 combination. Then the Blackhawks, Anton Frondel, a lot of guys that, from what I read, I thought he was going to be a little bit lower there, maybe anywhere between 6 to 10, but he gets chosen third overall. Then you had a couple of guys that I highlighted. James Higgins, the local kid from Long Island, he gets drafted by the Bruins, who went to Boston College, so obviously there's a connection there, so good for him, as he doesn't even have to go far, considering that he's going to be playing for the Bruins. Now, the other big power forward that I talked about, Roger McQueen, who played in the WHL and the Brandon Wheat Kings, big guy, 6'6", gets drafted by the Ducks. I was going to say Mighty Ducks. Gets drafted by Anaheim, so Anaheim's bringing in that big winger, who a lot of people think that he could really be a force. Who knows what his motor's going to be like, but McQueen was a guy that I looked at and said to myself, oh, maybe he could be one of those power forwards that would certainly be, I'm not going to say in the likes of even Alexander Ovechkin, certainly not the goal-scoring prowess, but a guy who is that big, that strong, physical, but also gets to the net, puts the puck in the net, etc. So McQueen, he goes out west to Anaheim. And the rest of the first round, I mean, what else can I tell you? A lot of those other guys that I talked about got off the Porter Matones, went to Philly. And yeah, Brady Martin, Nashville. Caleb Desnoyers. I know there's going to be a lot of Desnoyers destroyers in Utah. So we'll see how that unfolds. But your draft overall, obviously, from top to bottom, all the rounds, I'm not going to get into sleepers and things of that nature or who was a reach. Maybe you could look at, to a certain extent, Frondel, a bit of a reach, where a lot of the mock drafts had him a little bit lower. Not a lot, and I'm not going to go saying that he's a reach, because it's not as if he should have been drafted in the latter part of the first round. But who knows? Maybe Chicago, they liked what they saw with him, so therefore they took a chance. But that's with the NHL draft, at least with the first round, and with the Islanders, of course, ecstatic about what happened there. Now, as far as everything else that's happening and what's transpired here with the sport before I even get to the free agents, a lot of signings, teams or players with the same team similar to the NBA. Sam Bennett gets the 8-year extension to stay in Florida. Jonathan Tavares took a hometown discount. He felt it was the best fit, so he stays there. And also Matthew Nyes stays with a 6-year deal around $44 million. Now makes you think, Mitch Marner is, I would think, and I've said it before, I wouldn't bring him back. I don't know what the Maple Leafs are going to do. So for Marner, he could be the odd man out here, considering both Tavares and Nyes are back in the mix. And I wouldn't have brought Tavares back. I get it. He took a hometown discount. And for the Maple Leafs, they figured that, hey, the only reason why we're going to bring him back is because we're not going to offer him a big-time deal. granted that he's what now? He's going to be 35 years of age when you go into next season. So this is his last big contract, and he figured Toronto, that's his home. So congratulations to him. Then you had a few deals. Oh, before I get to the trades, Edmonton re-signs Trent Frederick. As we all know, tomorrow the Oilers could offer Connor McDavid a big-time contract. And as I talked about last week, McDavid not in a rush to sign an extension, wants to talk it with his family, and you could read between the lines of what he says and even worry, wonder, etc. if you're an Oilers fan on whether or not he's going to want to stay past next year. So let's see if the Oilers, they're going to back up the Brinks truck. Is it just a matter of Connor McDavid signing his John Hancock on the dotted line? So I'll be on top of that. But then you also have, as far as the trades go, Seattle trading acquiring Frederick Gaudreau from Minnesota for a 4th-round pick. And with with the Colorado, mixed up over here, my apologies, people, with them trading Charlie Coyle, the former Bruin, and Miles Wood to Columbus. They get the 77th overall pick and a conditional pick later on. So Colorado trying to see what they could do to leave some cap space, because although I believe they signed their big players, I don't know about Cale Makar. I know Nathan McKinnon got his big deal. Maybe Makar is looking for a big extension. Who knows? But that guy has to be a part of that team if that's the case there out in the Rocky Mountains. But as far as what has happened recently, and then also I have to throw in the mix too that the NHL, let's see if the Major League Baseball also follows suit, but National Hockey League and the CBA, the owners and players have agreed on a 4-year extension to the CBA, which will probably mean an 84-game schedule, which that hasn't been determined or official yet, so that we'll have to wait and see. Also, emergency goalie plans for situations where if a goalie gets hurt, if they're going to have a backup. On top of limiting contracts to 7 years, that's part of the agreement now with the players and owners. So that extends to September of 2030, or runs through 2030. So by the 2030-31 season, that's when the next CBA will have to be negotiated. But look at that. They did not play around. They did not fool around. In fact, the CBA would have been up September of next year. But that's what happens. And remember, the NHL, they lost the whole season in 95, or they lost most of the season. They had played 48 games. They lost the entire season in 2004, as you know, and they also had a couple of other mini stoppages along the way. So the last thing they wanted to do is fool around, and thankfully they're on the same page. Now, could baseball follow suit and do the same thing? Because as we all know, after next year, Armageddon is going to hit. So keep that in mind as we move it along. But as far as the free agency period for the NHL, you do have some players of note. Mitch Marner, for starters. Nicholas Backstrom, but I believe he's going to retire. Didn't he retire? I thought he retired. Or that was Evgeny Kuznetsov. But Backstrom, I know, has had a lot of injuries as of late, so I don't know if you want to take a shot there. Aaron Ekblad, and you wonder, with Bennett getting his money, will Ekblad also get the big-time payday? That remains to be seen. But he's a guy that, obviously, I'm sure a lot of people are going to look at. And who knows, would the Islanders even try to flirt with that? Bring in another defenseman? I understand he's been around 10 years. What is he? He's probably got to be around 30, 31. But he's probably going to want big-time money. I don't know if the Islanders, I probably wouldn't do that. Although they do need a veteran presence. They do need a guy in the locker room that's won Stanley Cups and knows their way around winning. That would be a good signing, but at what cost? I wouldn't give him 8 years. That's just me. I'm sure he deserves it, but the immortal words, just saying. Brad Marchand, that would be an interesting Islander pick. Why not? Nikolai Ehlers from Winnipeg, another big name. Ryan Lindgren, the defenseman, Rangers, Colorado. Alec Martinez, Patrick Kane, long in the tooth. Now, Evan Bouchard is interesting because he's a restricted free agent. And Bouchard, of course, the Edmonton defenseman. Let's see, does a team want to go after him? And part of this whole scenario in Edmonton, as far as trying to keep the players there, for McDavid to stay put. So let's see if Bouchard goes. But again, you're going to have to give up draft picks along the way. Keandre Miller from the Rangers, defenseman. Alexander Georgiev, the goaltender, San Jose, bounced around a lot. Vitek Vanacek, the goalie. So you have some names here that are certainly a lot better than what we've seen. Other than that, that's it. Tanner Janot, the rugged winger with the Kings last year. So better names on this list than the NBA for sure. And you got some guys that have won cups that certainly could be a big influence in a locker room that is looking to get themselves to a cup. So keep that in mind, people. They also have TJ Oshie, who retired, but I understand I got to put him here on the list. So yeah, we'll see how this is all going to shake down here over the next few days as midnight. And I'm sure you're probably going to hear some rumblings here today, as I believe the period starts today, even though July 1st, with the whole tampering issue, they usually do it the day before, or they have released a lot of these free agents. And I don't know, before I sign off, I'll take a look to see if anything has happened in both the NBA and NHL when it comes to those sports and free agency. And obviously, I will talk about that on Thursday's podcast when we reconnect at that time. But besides that, that's what I have there with the NHL. Now, lastly, as I break out the tennis rackets to get to the third tennis major of the year, and that being at Wimbledon, which is the best tournament of all, the Super Bowl of tennis, if you will. And for the defending champs of the previous tournament, that being the French Open, whether it's Coco Gauff or Carlos Alcaraz, the first storyline is, I wonder if the momentum from that win, which was just 4 weeks ago, is that going to carry over here on the grass surface? Now, for Gauff, that'll be interesting more so than Alcaraz, because Alcaraz has won Wimbledon twice, and I believe he's back-to-back defending champ, if I'm not mistaken. Let me look that up. I know he beat Djokovic 2 years ago, so Wimbledon winners. I believe he won last year as well, because he has 5 overall. So for Alcaraz, let's see. No, we're not going back to 1877. Alcaraz has won the last 2, and he beat Djokovic both times. 5 sets 2 years ago in an epic match. 6-1, 7-6, 6-1. Yeah, that was 5 sets. And then last year, it was a sweep, although the third set was a tiebreak. So now he's looking for a three-peat at the All England Club. So you would think momentum, especially coming off of that epic performance, one of the great matches of all time against Jannik Sinner. And you know, Sinner, he's had to sit on that for 4 weeks, and I'm sure he's using that as momentum to see whether or not you're going to have another clash of the Titans there 2 weeks from yesterday. So that is going to be the big storyline there, whether or not Alcaraz and Sinner will match up against one another again, which I'm sure the tennis faithful and even the casual fan, considering what we saw there at Roland Garros, can we get a carbon copy or close to a repeat performance of what we saw there in Paris? I mean, I'd sign for that in blood, because I'll be riveted to watch that match if both of those guys are going to be faced off against one another. So with the men's side, Djokovic is dangerous. He made it to a semifinals, we know, in the French. Can he do that again? Now, he'll probably have to go up against Sinner in a final, but Sinner has not played well on the surface. So that's something to keep in mind here. We know he's great on the hard surface, and as we saw there at the French, very good on clay, but on the grass has not been good. So we'll have to keep that in mind as the tournament moves it along, on whether or not Djokovic could try to get that 25th and maybe match up against Alcaraz in a final for a third straight year. Obviously, that'd be very compelling and intriguing to say the least. So men's side looks like that could be a bit of a troika, whether it's Alcaraz, Sinner, Alcaraz, Djokovic, and obviously in the semifinal, you're going to have Djokovic and Sinner. I should say obviously, because we have to see how this is going to play out here over the next 2 weeks. But men's side looks good, because other than that, I don't know if you're going to believe in the Tommy Pauls, the Taylor Fritzes, the Francis Tiafos, especially the guys on the American side, and even the Daniel Medvedevs. Forget about Stefano Tsitsipas, the Holger Runas, the Casper Ruuds, guys like that, that yes, they could play well, they could certainly do some damage, but are they going to get deep, quarterfinal, even semifinal for that matter? I don't know. Those guys are a couple low, even Djokovic at this stage of his career, but they're a couple low, Sinner and Alcaraz at this point. They are not guys that, although they may have had their moments in the past against the two aforementioned, and maybe even Djokovic for that matter, but I certainly don't look at them as a big threat on the men's side to not even get to a final and win, but even to a semifinal for that matter. So we'll see, but one of those four are going to get there, or I should say one of those four. If by chalk we get Alcaraz and Djokovic as well as Sinner, who's that fourth guy? So that's where we're going to have to see whether or not the Runas, the Rudes, the Medvedevs, the Alexander Zverevs, guys like that. And a lot of people may think it could be Zverev because I believe he's ranked 3 in the world at this present moment. So I'm looking forward to it. Certainly fascinated by what is going to transpire here over the next 2 weeks. And then on the women's side with Gauff, now for her to get the piano off her back after winning the U.S. Open a couple of years ago, and for her to get the French in the way she did against Sabalenka, who's the #1 player in the world, I would think she's going to be riding high and feeling good going into Wimbledon. And I believe she's made it to a couple of semifinals and maybe even into a final. Let me see here as I pull that up. Because I have the men's side. Let's see the women's side. Let's see if I could just hit a tab here and move that along. But for Gauff, I would think the carryover may last a week. I don't know once we get into the second week. And I think she probably will go deep. I think she'll probably get to a semifinal. Now, Sabalenka, I'm sure, similar to Sinner, is going to want to reflect and realize the mistakes that she's made, whether it be on the court or even during the post-match, for the things that she said in reference to her game and pretty much coming up with excuses left and right. Although she's the type of player where when she's off her mental game, it unravels. But for Sabalenka, I would think she would use what happened in Paris as motivation to get through the Wimbledon, to get to a final. Iga Świątek, she has not played well here. She's more of a clay court player as we've seen. And that's not to all of a sudden discount Świątek, but is she going to be primed for a big run here? I don't know. She could be the wild card where maybe she'll get that far, but Świątek hasn't really shown and proven, especially in Wimbledon, that she's going to be a force and a player that will probably be there at least one of the last 2, maybe even the last 4 standing, getting to a semifinal. But it's going to be highly competitive. So whether it's Madison Keys, Jessica Pegula, Elena Rybakina, of course, aforementioned Sabalenka, and I know I'm missing a couple of others along the way here, but the women's a little bit more wide open, I think, than the men's. And I think Sabalenka, I'd like to see what she's going to be made of here in this tournament. There's a part of me that wants to pick her, but I don't know if, first of all, I'm not 100% confident, but I don't know if the mistakes that she's made, is she going to be able to learn? And considering it's a quick turnaround, it's not as if it was the Australian where she had literally 3.5 months to sit on this before she got to the French. No, she had 4 weeks from the time she lost in the final to the start of this tournament here. So for Sabalenka, let me see. And I think that's a very interesting storyline too, to see whether or not she gets back on the beam after that loss. But for let me get to the women's here, because for whatever reason it's not coming up. Wimbledon women's winners. How about that before I sign off? And the last few years, I don't think Świątek, and that's the one person who I'm looking at. And last year you had, Jasmine Paolini, she's another one, by the way, and Ons Jabeur, who I've loved over the last couple of years. But for these winners, and think about this, the Ashley Bartys, Elena Rybakina, who won 3 years ago, Marketa Vondrousova, which was the big-time shocker there, where she won in straight sets, and then Barja Krejcikova, who won last year and is the defending champion, the last 2 being both in the Czech Republic. That's why it's wide open. And the surface has a lot to do with it, because it's not a hard surface, or even clay for that matter, where we know a lot of these players, they play on the hard surface, obviously the Australian, the US Open in particular, when it comes to the major tournaments. So right now, I mean, besides those aforementioned and even the Petra Kvitkovas and players like that, I can't even tell you who's going to win this. If anything, it's easy to say Coco Gauff because of the momentum, etc. But what the hell? I'll say Jessica Pegula. Maybe it's her time. Or even Jasmine Pauline, who did not play well at the French. The men's, I'm picking Alcaraz. I'm an Alcaraz. I won't go as far as saying groupie. I like Alcaraz. He is the guy right now. Although I can see Sinner win, and maybe Djokovic, this could be his last, maybe his Tiger moment. Where when Tiger won the Masters in 2019, and maybe he finds a way to win his 25th overall. But I'm going to say Alcaraz on the men, and what the hell, I'm going Pegula on the women's. Just like Madison Keys, when she won the Australian, which she came out of nowhere to win, maybe I can see Pegula do that here on this stage to win her first Wimbledon and to get herself off the schneid as far as the major championships go. So I'm looking forward to it. Obviously, with the Sports Dead Zone 2.0, with not much going on, I'm on top of it. I'll be all over it. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are too, as well as looking forward to the next podcast, which is coming at you Thursday, because that will conclude this podcast. Not much in the NFL. I'm not talking about, I probably should have talked about Topuria winning the match the other night for the UFC, and really Jake Paul and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. No way. I wouldn't even touch that with a 20-foot pole, let alone even a 5-foot pole. But that will conclude another episode. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is to have to say in the toy department of life called sports. And like I mentioned at the top, people, please subscribe, rate, review on wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, all available platforms. Just to increase the visibility, go to my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ. I put up content every day, working on some even lifestyle content, which should be interesting in regards to my work, the podcast, where I'm at here as an independent podcaster, content creator, almost a year and a half in from leaving corporate America to do this full time to try to earn a living, which I'm still trying to do, people. So please support. I implore you to subscribe, do all the particulars when it comes to that, and I appreciate your support, and certainly am grateful that you're whether a first timer or you've been here since day one. Just know that I appreciate your participation, support, etc. Just spread the word, share with everybody out there. To the good sports fan, the diehard sports fan in your life, one more time, I sincerely appreciate it. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, suggestion, you can do so at the following on any of my socials, of course, on YouTube at JAYREELZ, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JAYREELZ Podcast, or JAYREELZ on Instagram. JAYREELZ1, just the number on Twitter, and the old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. This is why I quit my job, to do this full time, to earn a living, doing what it is that I love, in the blood and the DNA, to been talking sports since birth, with nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury. And where else are you going to get all these sports? Where are you going to get baseball, hockey, tennis, basketball, football when the time comes, boxing, you name it. Golf with the British Open coming later on in the summer, or pretty much later on in July. Because as long as I'm sitting in front of this microphone and camera, you know, with the passion, fire, energy, fury, as I mentioned, but more importantly, my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond. Peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.